Okay, welcome everybody to the Jewish Life Cycle class. We are up to episode 14, and that is the wedding ceremony, the chuppah. There's quite a bit to discuss, and we're already quite a bit into it from the last class. Now, we talked in the last class about the shmira. In other words, the chatan and kala need a shomer, need a call it a guard, call it a supervisor, an attendant for quite some time, and there are different customs. There are different customs about that when that begins and when that ends. Um, it's important probably to discuss before we go much further. It's probably important to discuss what is the mitzvah of marriage. Now we know that the first mitzvah in the Torah is pru'urvu. There's a mitzvah for a man and woman to have children, a man in particular, and that's a very important, actually, a very important topic to really clarify, is that it is a mitzvah on men to have children. Now, if a woman wants to, and usually she does biologically, then she can be a mother, but she has no obligation to marry, and she has no obligation to have children. And in general, people want to. That's it's a sort of a moot point. But if somebody doesn't want to, there's no reason for community or a family to put pressure on somebody to have to get married. If it's a girl, if it's the boy, so he has an obligation to get married, just like he has an obligation to put on tefillin. And so if he does not, for whatever reason, then a community can, if it deems worthwhile, it can assert pressure to get the boy to marry. But if he's very much against, he's a dedicated bachelor or whatever you want to call it, there's really not much anybody can do, and probably if that's the case, it's probably not even worthwhile to even try to do anything about it. There are famous people. I know these are Gentiles, but there are famous people in history who never got married, never wanted to. Famous story about the Wright brothers. I don't know if you know this, but Wilbur and Orville Wright, who invented who bicycle mechanics, right? Who invented the airplane, and they famously tried to sell their idea or show their idea to the American government. The American government didn't believe them, and this is before, this is before the internet. Right? The airplane was before the internet, so there was no way to get mass testimonials to the government that they actually invented this, and the government did not believe that these nobodies outwitted their own scientists. The government had paid millions of dollars for scientists to invent the plane, and it wasn't working. Anyway, so eventually they gave up trying to sell their idea to the American government, and shopped their idea around to other countries, including France. And in France, certain businessmen tried to seduce them with women, and the two brothers were not interested. They were not interested in women at all. They're just, there's some people like that who are just not interested in marriage, not interested in settling down, and that's not what they think about. I'm not familiar with too many people like that, but I guess it happens, and they were not convinced. Anyway, either way, long story short, they finally sold their ideas to America. Not related to marriage, right? But this is the conclusion of that particular story. Now, what do a bride and groom wear? So traditionally, the groom wears a kit. I'm sorry. Oh, I heard a voice. Traditionally, a groom wears it was called a kittel, and at least in Ashkenazic circles. And there are several reasons for this. The most famous reason is brought down by the Yavitz, who says that the reason for wearing a kittel is because it's reminiscent of the tachrichim that a person is going to wear at the end of days, right? When a person passes away, and we'll talk quite in some detail about that when we get to it in the Jewish life cycles class. We're going to go through the entire tahara and funeral ceremony, everything. But when we get to it, but one of the things that that you should know is that when a person passes away, when they're put into the aron, into the casket, they are wearing white clothing, the same white clothing for everybody, rich or poor, one size fits all, and there's reasons for that we're not going to get into right now. But when the Chatan is under the chuppah wearing this supposed to be plain white robe, it's supposed to be reminiscent of the plain white clothing that he's also going to wear on when he passes. Now, that's not to make the wedding a depressing thing, but it's to lower his joy a little bit. There's other things we do as well to lower the joy a little bit, and we'll talk about that pretty soon. That's one of the reasons for breaking the glass, as the famous, like, even in non-Jewish movies, when they have a Jewish wedding, they have a chuppah and they have breaking the glass. So that's like breaking the glass is the most important thing, and that's what makes them married. That's not the case. We're actually today, God willing, going to talk about why we have this custom. But one of the reasons, as we're going to mention, one of the reasons is to lower our joy a little bit, because we even the pasuk tells us in Tehillim, in chapter 2 of Tehillim, it says, serve Hashem with fear and rejoice with trembling. So even when you rejoice, you should have a little bit of trembling. You should have a little bit of not go out of your mind with joy and happiness. You should sort of measure your happiness to some degree, tone it down a bit, so that you fulfill the words of this verse. Okay, so that's one of the things that the Chatan wears. A kittel, it is traditional for the shomer to put the kittel onto him to help him with it. It's just a thing. There's a famous custom, especially amongst the yeshiva community, and maybe particularly the Hasidic community, to wear something over the kittel. To wear like a raincoat, like a plain drab, Columbo detective raincoat over the kittel. And the reason for that is to not be too ostentatious, right? To not be too showy about, people are going to see, and they're going to, start maybe have an ayin hara, these sorts of things. So to sort of tone it down a bit, to make it as if it's a regular old day, you're wearing a regular old raincoat on top of your kittel. That's a custom. There's also a famous custom to put ashes on the forehead of the groom where the tefillin go, and that's also in reminiscence of the fact that we're mourning Yerushalayim. Even in our greatest joy, we should remember that Yerushalayim is not rebuilt. Mashiach has not come. We're not as joyous as we can be, as we could be. There should be even, and we'll talk about this in many regards throughout this class. If we haven't mentioned it already, there's an idea of zecher l'churban, to remember the fact that the Yerushalayim is still in ruins. No matter how fancy some of the buildings are in Yerushalayim, there is the most important part of Yerushalayim. That's the temple, the Beit Hamikdash, has not yet been rebuilt, and therefore we are still at least somewhat in mourning, if not completely in mourning. And we should remember that even at our high points, the high points of our life. And when we build a house, and we'll talk about all of this as we progress through the Jewish Life Cycles course. All right. So another reason to wear the kittel is because it's the day of one's wedding. The Gemara tells us is a person is forgiven of all their sins. So it's like it's like a sort of like a miniature Yom Kippur, which is, as we mentioned last week, why the Chatan is supposed to say the Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur Mincha before the chuppah. It's the same reason. It's like a Yom Kippur. He's forgiven for all his sins, and just like he would wear a kittel on Yom Kippur, so too he's wearing a kittel on his own personal Yom Kippur, which is this wedding day. Okay, that's what the groom wears. The bride, we know, wears a wedding dress. The with a veil and usually a headpiece, and that headpiece is actually going to be quite important in a few moments when we get to an important discussion about when the bride should start covering her hair, which is, there are different customs about this. I'll give you the main, or I don't want to say the main, but what I've seen usually. And it doesn't mean that everybody does this. Maybe this is just an Ashkenazic thing, but whatever the case may be, we'll have a little bit of a discussion about that. But the girl usually wears a dress, a wedding dress. It's usually white. It's usually, not too ostentatious. Hopefully, there's a modicum of decorum. It should not not be too flashy. At the same time, it shouldn't overemphasize her physique. It shouldn't be not snoot. It should at the same time, it's not, it's also not, a paper bag. It's supposed to be nice, but at the same time, not too form-fitting, etc. Obviously, each case is different, and people like to have a unique dress, or sometimes they like to not have a unique dress. They want to have their mother's wedding dress or something to that effect. Nothing wrong with that. There are many kalot, many brides in Israel and in large Jewish communities where the dress comes from a geniza, from not a geniza, yeah, thank you, gemach. I say geniza. All right, it should come from a geniza. Don't wear anything from geniza. All right, so it comes from a gemach. Thank you. And there's a special wedding dress gemach in many communities where somebody already bought it. It's already paid for. It's one of the things the bride doesn't have to spend money on. It's a lot of money to spend on a dress you're only going to wear, God willing, once. Right? So it's obviously ideal to save that money and spend it on better, more practical things. As we've said, we spent some time talking about last class. I made myself a double promise I wouldn't rant about it again. So there you go about that. The bride also wears a ring, but not at the beginning of the wedding. She gets a ring. So let's talk about the ring. Are we ready for that yet? Sorry, I'm just so anxious to see the wedding already. We're not even talking about some of the other details. We already had the parents walking them to the chuppah. We already had some of the other customs. There's music, there's singing, there's the words Baruch haba. There's a whole prayer to say when the chatan comes. When there's a special prayer to say for the kala. It's usually sung. There's beautiful tunes to it. Obviously, we've had several thousand years of tradition that allows us to have already many beautiful tunes to fit with different cultures, etc. Now, there's another person under the chuppah that we haven't talked about yet, and we probably should, and that's the Mesader Kedushin. That's the rabbi, usually a rabbi, should be a rabbi, who's running the show. Literally Mesader Kedushin means he's organizing, he's being Mesader, he's putting in order, he's putting in Seder the Kedushin, the whole the marriage. The Irusin, the Nesuin, everything is is his responsibility. He's supposed to be the one to make sure that she's allowed to marry him. He's allowed to marry her. That he's supposed to talk to them. He's supposed to make sure that they had some sort of classes before, so that they're ready for the more intricate halachic concepts of marriage, taharat mishpacha, etc. One moment. That feels better. Okay. Plugging in your computer is a good idea. This is a great time to talk about taharat mishpacha. I don't want to go into too much detail yet, but it's worth remembering that we are right smack dab in the middle of the weeks of Shovavim, which is a traditional time in many Jewish communities when they review the laws of taharat mishpacha and those sorts of things, and tzniut and shalom bayit and a lot of other laws that sometimes get pushed aside because of the life. Life goes on, and we don't always have time to focus on some of these concepts, and we have to remember that these are important also. Okay. That said, so the Mesader Kedushin is supposed to do that. Now, who should be the Mesader Kedushin? Did you know that there's even halachot about this? You can't just be just anybody. You can't just you have a bunch of rabbis at your wedding. You can't go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and just pick a rabbi there. Yeah, like I said, this rabbi is supposed to have done things before the wedding also, besides getting the ketubah written up and everything else. The officiating rabbi is an important decision that is actually, according to the Rambam, the completely in the chatan's purview. It's the groom's responsibility to pick the officiating rabbi, according to the Rambam. Why? Because, as we said before, whose mitzvah is this? It's his mitzvah. It's a mitzvah on the man to get married. And so it's his mitzvah, it's his responsibility to organize it all. But wait a minute, you're going to say, did he pay for the flowers? Did he pay for it? Did he buy the dress? No, obviously he's unless he's independently wealthy, he can't afford to do everything himself. He's still relying on his parents and on his future in-laws. But certainly, it's according to the Rambam anyway, this particular responsibility goes on him. Now, that's not everybody's opinion. That's why I kept emphasizing that that's the Rambam. Other people say, where is the wedding taking place? It usually takes place in the bride's. This is, by the way, this custom is, I want to say, almost brand spanking new, right? Ever since the invention of the train, have Jews been able to marry people from far away. Until then, people mostly married people from within their community. So the bride's town was the chatan's town, right? That's where everybody grew up. They lived in the same shtetl usually, or wherever, the same town of the same part of Baghdad, the same ghetto in Italy. Right? They lived in the same places. You weren't able to marry somebody from far away until really mass transit, the train and such. But let's push that aside for the moment. So this custom became that the wedding is to take place where the bride is from. So the majority of guests, therefore, usually are from the bride side of the family, right? Usually. And if that's the case, there are some authorities who say that that's a good reason for the bride to choose who the Mesader Kedushin should be, because it's probably going to be somebody from her town. That's where the wedding's taking place. It makes sense. You're not going to schlep, the chatan's rabbi from another town along with him, although very often that happens as well. The common custom, writes Rav Ari Enken in Elu V'Elu, his halachic responses, he writes, the common custom today is to allow the groom to appoint the Masada Kedushin in almost all circumstances. And then he adds, this is the important line, as with all issues and compromises in life, one should make extensive efforts to ensure that this one does not turn into machloket. Obviously, if for whatever reason the bride is stuck on on having a particular rabbi run the show, and for some whatever reason does not want the Rebbe of the groom for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe she doesn't like his singing voice, maybe she doesn't think he's a good enough speaker, whatever, all kinds of mishugas. She wants her perfect wedding, and if for whatever reason she's against it, it would be a wise decision for the groom to compromise. That's part of married life. It's a good place to start. Compromise on who you think should officiate. Very, very often, a good rabbi is usually humble. Usually, I wouldn't know, but they're usually humble, and so they say things like, "Don't ask me, ask this rabbi, ask this." So usually they there's a whole game to play with that, but the important thing is for the groom to if he has the reshut from his future wife to choose who should officiate, he should definitely be certain about whom and why that person should lead, should do this. Okay. Okay. We mentioned before that the bride wears a veil. It's not usually just a veil. There's usually an entire headpiece, and we're going to see that that's actually quite an important piece because of another question that Rav Enkin brings up, and that is, from which point should the bride actually cover her hair? Good question, right? Now, a woman covering her hair is a halacha. It's not a custom. It's not a stringency. It's a halacha. It's brought down in the Gemara in Ketubot 72a. It's mentioned or hinted to in the Torah. The Gemara learns it from an incident in the Torah. We should talk about that incident because it's going to actually be relevant to the final halacha. The incident is the incident of the sota. A sota is a woman who is suspected of having an affair. And in the whole ceremony in which she's basically embarrassed to the point where she'll finally break down and admit that she had an affair, if she had an affair, part of the embarrassment is that her headpiece is removed. Her hair is exposed. And therefore, the Gemara learns out, by the way, and this is the Gemara in Sota 24b. The Gemara learns out that the only time that a woman even has her hair covered or is even allowed to go through the Sota ceremony is if she's actually had relations with her husband. Okay? In other words, if there's a woman who for whatever reason did not have actual relations with her husband, she can never have to go through the Sota ceremony, which means also she does not have to cover her hair, because having relations is somehow connected to why a woman covers her hair. This is not a class on why and all that. We're not going to. It's too big of a topic. It's probably like a whole series in and of itself about why women cover their hair, how they cover their hair, and all that stuff. We're not going to get into that. But whatever it means to cover your hair, a woman only has to do that if she's had relations with her husband. Therefore, the common custom is for a woman not to cover her hair until after the night after the wedding, because that's when she can be assumed to have had relations with her husband. Now, up until that point, even in the Eucharide Room, which we'll talk about in a few moments, even in the Eucharide Room, they're not really assumed to be doing anything. It's not really the time for that. That's not the first thing on their mind, assuming, and therefore that's not the assumption, and she does not have to cover her hair. However, interestingly enough, Rav Enkin brings up the point that because he suggests, he bases this on the opinion of the Mahari Halevi and the Shevet Halevi. He says that if this head covering that she's wearing with the veil covers most of her hair, so it counts as a hair covering, and she's good for even the opinions that say that she should have her hair covered already under the chuppah. There are customs like that. It's a very strict opinion. It does not seem to fit with the Gemara, by the way, as other Gemaras as well make it very clear that a girl doesn't need to cover her hair at that point. Either way, she's got her hair covered with this veil. That should be good enough for these purposes, and she's good to go. Very often, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't really pay too much attention, but I'm under the impression that these headpieces are usually removed. That's at a certain point, usually in the Eucharide Room, and then like for the dancing and everything, the woman doesn't wear like the veil headpiece thing. She still has her hair made up or whatever, but even in those cases, as we said before, because she's assumed to have not had relations yet, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Rav Yisrael Belsky, all of them said that she does not have to cover her hair until the next morning. And that seems to be, from my experience, again, I don't look at the bride too carefully. I'm under the impression that they usually do not cover their hair until the next day. Okay, so that's about what they wear. Let's talk about the ring now. The ring is after the bride walks around the groom the 7 times. We said that there's a difference of opinion about when and why they do that and how many times. But let's say it's 7 times. The ring is given by the groom to the bride. Before it's given to the bride, it's given to the Rav, the Mesader Kedushin, and the Mesader Kedushin shows it to 2 witnesses. These 2 witnesses, by the way, very important, they should be not related, they cannot be related to each other, they cannot be related to the groom or to the bride. And there should be a statement made that they are the sole witnesses to the wedding, to the exclusion of everyone else. Okay? They are the witnesses to the wedding, and they have to make sure that the groom gives the bride this ring and that he owns it, and that it is worth more than a pruta, which in most halachic literatures say it says that it should be worth more than a penny. That's not what a pruta is anymore. A pruta is the lowest form of coin that can still buy you something. Now, a penny cannot buy you anything anymore. I'm pretty sure a nickel can't buy you anything. I don't even think a dime can buy you anything. I'm pretty sure that this ring that they're getting married with has to be at least worth 25 cents. All right, at least 25 cents. You can't get it in your Cracker Jack box. By the way, you can't get anything in a Cracker Jack box because now they only have like paper toys and fake tattoos and stuff. All right. Anyway, whatever it is, stickers, that sort of thing. They don't even have toys in there anymore. Can you believe it? Anyway, I shouldn't rant about that either. The ring is has to be owned by the Khatan. It has to be a pure ring. In other words, it can't have any stones in it. It has to be completely round and no inscriptions usually. And why is he giving her a ring? Why is he giving her a gift at all? It's because the Gemara or Mishnah in Kedushin tells us how a man marries a woman. And it says with 3 things: Kesef, Shtar, and Bia. Kesef is money or a gift, and that's what the ring is. Shtar is a document, and that's the ketubah. And Bia is the relations, and that's going to be represented by the Eucharide Room, which we'll get to in a few moments. Give me 9 minutes. I'll get you through the Eucharide Room. Joke. Okay. Anyway, so the ring has to be worth at least 25 cents. It's usually not a problem if it's a gold ring. It's probably going to be worth quite a bit more. And the Chatan has to own it. It has to be his. It can't be he's borrowing it. He's not lending. He's not leasing it. It's his. Completely. He owns that. He's the owner of that ring. Interestingly, you don't usually have to prove that in any way. You don't have to like show the receipt or anything. But I guess we take his word for it. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's the story there about the ring. The witnesses are supposed to say yes, it's worth more. It's worth a pruta, at least, and then the witnesses are supposed to watch as the ring is placed by the chatan onto the kala's index finger, right? Her usually right finger, index finger. This is the reason for this is because that's the more active finger, right? It's put on the ring finger, interestingly enough, because the ring finger has no other use. It's our weakest finger in a way. It's even weaker than our pinky in some instances. Definitely the least useful of our fingers, usually. That's why the ring is usually worn there. But that's not the finger that it's actually put on at the beginning. We accept it. The woman accepts the marriage. That's a very important thing, by the way. It was unique to Judaism actually at the time that the woman is an active participant in the wedding ceremony. In almost all other cultures, a woman is basically maybe one step up from like chattel, right? It's a purchase, and she comes along, she's pulled along to wherever her father and the groom agree to. In a Jewish wedding, she needs to accept the ring. If she does not stick out her index finger, or if somebody forces it on her finger or something like that, it's not a kosher wedding. They're not married. She has to actually accept this groom. And if she does not, she does not. They're not married. And there's no way to force a girl to marry. Baruch Hashem. The Chatan, before putting the ring on, must say the words, Harei at mikudeshet li b'tabat zu kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. Behold, you are betrothed unto me, according to the laws, the traditions of Moshe and Yisrael. By saying Moshe and Yisrael, by the way, we're indicating that it's the written law, Moshe, and Yisrael, that's the oral law. In other words, all rabbinic laws are all being fulfilled by us today. We're completely married. Not like according to some opinions you're married. No, according to all opinions, according to all deot and everything else, we're definitely completely married. The let's see. There's an opinion, by the way, that one of the reasons that it's put on the index finger is because that's where the ring used to be worn. That's the opinion of the Chidah, amongst others. At this point, different honors. I should have started before all this. The ketubah is read. And the ketubah is basically a list of obligations that the groom has for the bride. In other words, that a man has in a marriage, not the other way around. Also very unique to Judaism, by the way. And one of the responsibilities is, if for whatever reason the marriage terminates, in divorce, God forbid, as we'll learn about in next week's class, or if he passes away, or something to that effect. In those sorts of situations, indeed, um, she is promised a certain amount of money that's going to basically help sustain her until she's able to find another husband and be comfortable again. Now, this is, of course, a lot of this is based on the assumption that she needs support. Now, as you probably know, we live in a time when most women work. Most women, I mean, vast majority of women work, and so they don't need the support per se. But we also know the reason that they work is because most normal lives require a two-income, sustenance. So if she's even working alone and he's not working, or if he's not alive, God forbid, or if they've divorced, the amount of money that she's earning might not support her alone. So that's why it's still a useful idea to have that support. And of the ketubah, it's also a way to sort of to discourage him from divorce when things can be worked out. It doesn't mean it's supposed to discourage him from divorce when things can't be worked out, if he's, God forbid, abusive or anything like that, and that there should be a divorce. So by all means, there will be, and the community is supposed to help encourage a successful departure from his home. We'll get to all that at some other time, though. We should know such things. After the ketubah is read, usually the rabbi gives a short speech, hopefully short. I've seen long speeches too. It's not the place for that, I would say. But not everybody not everybody passes up a good opportunity to speak to a to an audience, especially an audience that can't escape. And so that's, oh boy. Anyway, so the Mesader Kedushin says the two brachot. Those two brachot are he makes a gafen, and he says the next blessing is the blessing of the erusin, which actually completes the betrothal part of the wedding. As we've said in the last class, it used to be the betrothal, and an actual wedding used to span quite a bit of time, sometimes even a year. And they're like partially married for like a year, and then finally completely married after that. That's not ideal, as the rabbis have decided. It's a lot of bad things happen, like we said last time, that the bride and groom become very comfortable with each other, and they figure they're already married, might as well act completely like husband and wife, even though they're not completely husband and wife yet. So that was definitely discouraged, and eventually both parts of the wedding ceremony were combined together, or the chuppah and the writing of the ketubah were on the same day, actually pretty much at the same time. So after this, after the ring and after the chuppah, so after the ketubah, then we call on other people to complete the 7 brachot, which is called the Sheva brachot. And usually there are people who are there. Obviously, it helps. They have to be there, and they're usually people who are important or care about the bride and groom, and they're chashuv, the more respected members of the community, of the town, should be called up for this. More important, more chashuv guests of some sorts, the Rosh Yeshiva, etc., etc. By the way, the witnesses, my Rosh Yeshiva made it very clear that he thinks it's more important for the Rosh Yeshiva to be the witness instead of the Mesader Kedushin. In other words, the people who are testifying that this is an actual marriage, that the whole wedding hangs on them. And so you want to make sure that those people are chashuv, that those people aren't just like, just some old buddy, if the old buddy turns out to be a Rosh Yeshiva, great. But that's not the case for everybody. So it's important that the witnesses be people who are trustworthy. That's what a witness has to be. Somebody who would be able to go into a court and say, I know these people, they're married. I was one of the witnesses. Okay. After he makes the hagafen, he gives to the bride and groom to drink from it. There's a famous idea that the wine should be white. Anybody know why? To not stain the dress. That simple. All right, so just be practical. There's no reason for it to be red, and no reason why it can't be white. And so that happens. So then they drink from it, and then they get to the part where they break the glass. Now, in most weddings nowadays, that glass is some cheap, easy to break piece of glass, just so there can be glass that's broken. It's usually, to be honest, it's usually a light bulb. Right? Easy to break, very small, fits into a napkin. It's beautiful. By the way, you should wrap it in a napkin, not for any like halachic or mystical reasons, but just because you don't want to get cut when you step on it, because it's in a napkin, it'll pick up the pieces better. The tradition, though, has nothing to do with it being necessarily glass, although glass is part of the custom. The material is glass, but it's not just glass. It's supposed to be a glass cup, is where the original custom came from. And amongst other reasons for this, we mentioned already that one of the reasons is to sort of tone down the joy. You shouldn't be too happy. And the other reason is, and we talked about this as well, and the other reason is to remember Yerushalayim. We're not, and both of those reasons, by the way, are related, because even without the idea of trembling when you're rejoicing, as the verse in Tehillim says, there's also a concept of just not being as happy as we could be without the Beit Hamikdash here. Another reason for that custom is the Rabbeinu Bechai says an interesting answer, and this has to do with this week's parsha, by the way, and that is that, remember, the children of Israel became sort of a bride to Hashem at Har Sinai. What else happened at Har Sinai? The Torah was given, and the Torah was broken, right? The luchot were broken, were smashed. So just like there was a smashing at the Beit Hamig, at the Har Sinai, so too at our weddings, we want to have a smashing. We want to have a smashing event. No, we want to have something else has to break, and that's another reason why we break the glass. It has nothing to do with Yerushalayim or standing and trembling or anything like that. It's all about the fact that there was a breaking of the luchot at Har Sinai. And finally, one other reason that's brought down from the Shloh HaKadosh on Parshat Shoftim, he says that, and this is a little bit complicated, but listen, last year we studied Kabbalah work, so this shouldn't be too complicated for most of you. All right, so we have the power of judgment. The Satan wants there to be judgment all the time. And one of the ways to sort of shut up the Satan is to appease him, to give him something. So, Satan, you want something to be broken? You want something to be judged? Judge this broken glass. See? So it's kind of like the whole. This is a little bit similar to the concept on Yom Kippur of the goat that's given to that's thrown down the mountain. All right, so the same thing here, that we're just trying to sort of appease the Satan so that he stays away from doing anything really dangerous. Yeah, so that's the broken glass, and then as promised, he breaks the glass. Usually, again, in Ashkenazic weddings, this is when the bride and groom go to the Yichud room. They're usually escorted. There's usually song and dance. People trying to, do some shtick, some juggling, some backwards dancing. This is also where people get trampled. Very often somebody trips on something because they're dancing backwards, and they're not being careful, and especially if it's a complicated route from the chuppah to the yichud room. By the way, this has a lot to do with wedding planning, right? You have to kind of plan this out well. But if you didn't plan this out well, it can be dangerous. I've seen people fall downstairs and bump into doors and bump into women and bump into all kinds of stuff when they're dancing backwards. The photographer is definitely in danger, especially if this is the first Orthodox wedding that the photographer is working at. It's a whole new world. Anyway, in Sephardic weddings, the yichud room is usually after the meal. Just so you know. Now, the yichud room itself, very important. The yichud room is, like I said before, representative of the solitude that the bride and groom would need to have in order to have relations. Not that they're actually supposed to have relations here. It's not usually even set up for that, as you'll see in a moment. But the point is for them to have a complete alone time, and the way that the kind of alone time that a boy and a girl who are not married to each other should not have. I remember. I'm going to jump into controversy here. I don't know why. I don't think it should be controversial at all. But we had our previous vice president, Vice President Pence, was sort of mocked by many groups because he would not ever have a meeting alone with a woman. He insisted on any time that he would have a meeting and he needed privacy to be alone with a woman, he would make sure that there would be somebody else there, his wife, or the door would be open, etc. Happens to be that's Jewish law. That's halachically you have to do that. And then everybody was making fun of him. He's so uptight. Why can't he trust himself, etc., etc. And then the news of Harvey Weinstein and his ilk in Hollywood came out, and people realized that having meetings alone can lead to things, and usually it's nothing kosher, and it should not be done. So these are some of the reasons for the laws of yichud. So in the marriage ceremony, in the Ashkenazic, as I said before, marriage ceremony, they're escorted to the yichud room. The yichud room is supposed to be traditionally set up for them to have food, because remember, they have not eaten yet, right? Unless this is Rosh Chodesh or some other day when they can't fast, including, by the way, Tu B'Shvat, which just ended. Should mention Tu B'Shvat, and Tu B'Shvat, Tu B'Av, some other days when a bride and groom should not fast. Otherwise, they should fast on the day of their wedding, again, for that same Kapara Yom Kippur connection, as mentioned before. Now, the yichud room usually has some food for them, not usually something to wash on and everything else, because he's probably going to make the hamotzi later on the giant challah at the Suda, right? The giant challah that goes from one room to another, right? Because you got to have a giant challah. That's what all the caterers tell you. By the way, since this is a halacha class, let me tell you, there's no halacha of such a thing. That did not even exist. Yeah, even in old customs, nothing like it existed. The giant challah is the furthest thing from our imagination. You don't have to have a giant challah. You can have the chatan make hamotzi on a regular piece of bread. It doesn't even have to be a whole challah. Why doesn't it have to be whole? because you only need 2 whole challahs for Yom Tov and Shabbat. This is not either of those. For any other Suda, you can just make hamotzi on a regular slice of bread. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. But of course, the caterers will tell you otherwise, and it needs to be a roll, it needs to be a challah, it needs to, I don't know, say things, I don't know, talking challah. Anyway, so in the Eucharide rooms, usually set up some food, some refreshments, something to drink. They're probably thirsty after fasting and after, busy day. They're, getting married. Lots of brachos they were giving out. Lots of smiling. Their cheeks are probably tired. That sort of thing. So this is so they're supposed to be private at this point, and typically they're supposed to have privacy for 9 minutes. Okay, for at least 9 minutes. So that's about enough time for them, in theory, again, in theory, not in practice, in theory, to have potentially had relations. That's the idea. And after those 9 minutes, the witnesses knock on the door and they walk away. By the way, you do need to have witnesses at the door. I'm talking about witnesses, not even telling you need to have witnesses. They need to be witnesses at the door, and they knock on the door when the 9 minutes are up, and then they're free to go. And that's the wedding at this point. They are now 100% married according to Jewish law. They have had the kesef, shtar, and bia with witnesses for all 3 of those things. Now, the bia, the relations, obviously were not witnessed. They should not ever be witnessed. But the witnesses were those guys standing outside the door of the Yichud room that the relations could have happened in. All right, that's all. So that's why there need to be witnesses at those 3 stages, and then they are indeed married, and that's all that needs to be for the wedding ceremony outside of the food. Now, for the food, then it's a regular Sudat mitzvah, as we've talked about before. It should ideally have meat. It should obviously have bread. Usually, it has wine, and it's concluded with a birkat hamazon, a special birkat hamazon that again requires a minyan, and different people are given honors to say certain blessings. Again, the sheva brachot, and those sheva brachot are also said for every meal that the chatan and kala have for, in theory, the next 7 days. If they have a minyan for any other meal, those next 7 days, next 6 days, I should say, all right, they should have the sheva brachot benching. Now, that when I say that, this might sound a little confusing, because you're thinking to yourself, every meal, because we know they have one sheva brachot in the community, one sheva brachot in the shul, sheva brachot in another community. Right? So they have 7 sheva brachot. It's true, but every meal. So the fact is, if they wanted to, yes, they could have it for every meal. Remember, not so long ago, we made sheva brachot in shul for breakfast. Right after davening was a breakfast sheva brachot. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously, we did not have meat, unfortunately, but it was still sheva brachot, completely kosher, still benched with minyan, and said the special blessings. Obviously, there's usually divrei Torah, as there should be at any meal anyway. There's usually music and dancing at the wedding. This is the only real ceremony in Jewish law that needs to have music and dancing, unless, one condition, unless the wedding is in Yerushalayim. Now, typically in Yerushalayim, you're not allowed to have live music because you're surrounded by the ruins of Yerushalayim. You shouldn't be joyous as when you're seeing the destruction of Yerushalayim. So typically the bands over there play drums, which is not considered for some reason a musical instrument. Doesn't play notes, I guess. Usually there are kinds of drums that do. Not going to get into that. Anyway, so they play percussion and drum music, and they sing a cappella. So that's all fine. Forgot to say, famous custom. The bride and groom, before the chuppah, we're talking about what they wear. one of the things they don't wear is jewelry. They're supposed to sort of loosen their knots. If they have anything tied, they're supposed to loosen their knots a little bit. It's supposed to be like untied. They're supposed to go and take off any jewelry they might be wearing, any special earrings, necklaces. Obviously, most of that applies to the girl. If he's wearing a fancy watch, he shouldn't wear that under the chuppah. It's supposed to be sort of a very sort of simplified ceremony where the focus is on only one piece of jewelry, and that's the ring. Once she puts on that ring, that's when that focus is shouldn't be interrupted. And there's a custom many people have of giving gifts in the Eucharide Room. So like usually usually, like, this is not a law, it's a custom. Usually a groom will give his bride a pearl necklace or some sort of pearl jewelry in the Eucharide Room. Sometimes the bride will give the groom a watch or some other gift. There's just it's supposed to be a friendly event. This is a time they finally have to chat for the first time. Remember, they haven't seen each other for a week. Theoretically, they haven't even spoken to each other in a week, and this is a great opportunity for them to do that. In the time I have remaining, I'd like to talk about a custom many of you may or may not know about. I don't know much about it because I've rarely been to Hasidic weddings, but in mostly Hasidic weddings, there's something called a Mitzvah Dance, which means a Mitzvah Dance. And that is everybody married, every married male dances with the bride, but not obviously holding the bride or touching the bride, except for perhaps in some customs, the father of the bride and the groom himself, sometimes they dance holding each other's hands, but usually she's holding a rope or a long napkin, and other people, other chashuv people, other rebbeim and everything, and other men who are married hold the other end of the rope, and usually they dance around her or for her to sort of increase the amount of chashivut, the amount of importance that she feels at the time. So this is a completely Hasidic custom. Interestingly enough, though, Rav Enkin brings up that this custom is mentioned in the writings and works of the Maharil and the Machzor Vitri, which predate the Hasidic dynasties. So it's a pre-Hasidic custom that seems to be only kept in Hasidic communities. Very strange, very unique sort of idea. And like I said before, I've never actually seen it myself. What I have seen, I'm sure you've seen it too, is that the bride and groom are lifted on chairs and they're both holding two ends of a rope or a napkin. So that's sort of like a vestige of the Mitzvah Dance. Right? The Mitzvah Dance is supposed to be not just them holding it, but anybody can hold the other end of the rope and dance for the kala, dance with the kala that way. So that's like I said, an old custom that is still kept in many places. Like I said, I've never seen it. Doesn't mean just because I'm not invited to every wedding doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So that's some of the ideas of the wedding. I might be missing some things. I can't think of what I'm missing, but either way, we're out of time. And if I think of something else to add, we will. And next week we'll discuss as I hinted to before, the possible ending of a marriage, which is not a happy thing to talk about, but it is part of the Jewish life cycle for many people, and we need to discuss it so that we know more about it. I'm going to stop the recording and the live